Welcome back. Welcome back, everybody. Joining me now is Professor Harvey J Kaye. He is the Ben and Joyce Rosenberg Professor of Democracy and Justice Studies and Director of the Center for History and Social Change at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. He is an award-winning author of several books, including Why Do Ruling Classes Fear History? The Fight for Four Freedoms. I want to talk to him today about two of his most recent books, Take Hold of Our History, Make America Radical Again, as well as FDR on Democracy. Professor, how are you doing today? Thanks so much for joining us.
I'm okay. It's great to see you after what must be several years since our last conversation.
Yeah, the last time we spoke was during the primaries of 2016, or maybe shortly thereafter.
Uh-huh.
And the world has changed around us significantly. In this time of COVID-19 and the obvious policies, I think I've seen you tweet about it. A lot of us have tweeted about it. The things that we simply need to do to survive this, they parallel things that we should have been doing all along. They parallel the things like FDR's Economic Bill of Rights. It really signifies things that we should have been doing all along, yet and still, despite these basic policies, economic policies that would help the working class, that would help the middle class. Despite those being the things that we need to survive this pandemic, it seems as though both Democrat and Republicans, the ruling party of this country, just refuse to do anything significant for the people, even though those are the things we need to do to survive this pandemic. What are your thoughts on the politics of this moment?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've said to people that in many ways, it's like we have three crises all at once. So for 45 years, American working people have suffered nothing less than a class war from above. Okay, a class war from above pursued by the corporate, for lack of a better word, bosses. A class war from above that has been enabled not only by conservative and reactionary Republican Party ever since the 1970s, but also by a very, to my mind, rather deferential Democratic Party.
Mm.
In fact, in some cases, not simply deferential, but eager to participate by way of the neoliberal leaders who've commanded the Democratic Party.
Mm.
And we can name names. In fact, people don't quite often realize that neoliberalism begins with Jimmy Carter
Mm.
in the late 1970s. And I know you're down in Atlanta, and I don't mean to get you in trouble, but
No, it's fine.
okay, but it's Carter, Clinton, Obama. I mean, we've seen neoliberalism over and over again, and that's all dealt with in the various books I've written these past several years. But the other thing is, on top of that, we then ended up after these 45 years with so much anger
Mm.
in working people. And I live in the state of Wisconsin, which is one of the three states that surprised everyone and voted, and the electoral college votes went to Donald Trump.
Right.
Because okay, so now we had this anger that led to, it's as if people wanted to sort of punch somebody, and they ended up punching not only their fellow citizens
But
by voting
themselves.
for Trump, they ended up punching themselves,
Yeah.
right? And then so on top of the crisis of 45 years, we have this very, very intense, it's like class war on steroids we have right now. And then in the midst of this, and I'm sure when people thought about, well, what if we have a crisis? We thought of some kind of crisis like a war with Iran, something
Right.
that he would literally drag us into. It turned out we have a crisis that involves sort of, it's like a universal crisis to the extent that it's a pandemic,
Right.
okay, a global crisis. But as you were saying, here's the thing, that because the Democrats, or even once upon a time liberal Republicans, failed to enact in the wake of Medicare and Medicaid in the 60s, Medicare for all, or what we used to call universal health care, national health care. Because of that, we were utterly unprepared
Right.
to deal with the pandemic. And then to add to the tragedy, sorry, I get really, it just angers me because every time I saw a Democratic debate, the Republicans do what Republicans are supposed to do.
Mm.
They're supposed to benefit the business class, the corporate elite. It's the Democrats who always claim to be the party of the people who
Right.
utterly abandoned the FDR labor tradition. FDR labor and even civil rights tradition, we could add to that. So what do we end up with? We end up with a series of debates among Democrats in which they constantly looked over at Bernie and attacked him, telling him, how could we possibly afford
Hmm.
Medicare for all? And then all of a sudden, we are hit in a deadly fashion. I mean, it must be up to 85,000 of our fellow citizens who have died in the course of this pandemic. And that's an incredible number of people. And even if we get used to even bigger numbers, and we can't help but ask ourselves how shameful the Democrats were to make the argument against Medicare for all
Right.
when in the very wake of those utterly moronic arguments, utterly misguided arguments, we find ourselves in a crisis in which even if we couldn't save all lives, we could surely have better addressed the pandemic. And moreover, think about it this way: with the numbers of people who are now out of work,
Right.
who have lost their direct access to their health insurance, and we don't know when they'll be able to go back. I mean, we literally needed a social democratic America that had begun to develop in the 30s and the 60s, and we end up being a nation that our parents and grandparents and great grandparents would not even recognize.
Right. That's the disturbing thing about this moment is um in the debates you could see the fallacious arguments, you could see them doing everything that they could to protect the status quo as it pertains to healthcare specifically, right?
Mm.
And then even now, in the face of 33 million was the latest number, 33 million people unemployed, no telling how many lost their insurance because obviously, like when you're covered, your family's covered. So there's probably even more Americans who are uninsured. But even now, they are not talking, they being at least the Democrats, right? They are not
Right.
even talking about reforming this system. They're talking about doubling down on it by using the federal government to fund Cobra, right? The exorbitant priced Cobra that people get when they lose their jobs. They would rather spend more money, which we've been doing for years, than to actually address the systemic level problem. I like the way that you framed it, and I want to juxtapose my question with this, with what you framed, that Republicans are doing what Republicans do, what they're supposed to do. They are operating in a manner that you would expect an opposition party to operate when they oppose any type of social democracy. But we don't have any opposition in the Democratic Party, right? Not against the Republicans, not against. So we are really living in a single party rule, underneath a single party rule, and yet they are demanding that we vote for them. They're demanding that we come out in the middle of a plague and a pandemic to vote for them. Where do you see this going in terms of the alignment, the working people, the Democratic Party, vote blue no matter who? In your estimate, how does this play out?
Well, let me just say that even now, and I hate to think of myself as naive. I mean, I turned 70 years old this past year, and I
Congratulations.
think of myself as naive, but I still cannot fathom, I cannot comprehend that the Democrats have not found it in themselves, that those of us on the left, ranging from labor to Black Lives Matter, right across the board, have not literally demanded and witnessed Biden, Schumer, Pelosi, and Barack Obama himself standing forth and saying, "We see the light. We
Mm,
must have Medicare for all." Even now, I cannot fathom it.
mm,
Okay. Now, having said that, I think it would be foolish of me to say that we're in a good position to make these kinds of demands.
okay.
I mean, the fact is that labor is weak, and it takes money to put and it takes money even in the absence of a pandemic to put people on buses and on trains and on planes to get them to Washington. It's also the case that we're still a fragmented and fractured kind of movement. And in many ways, I'm sorry that Bernie pulled out in the fashion that he did so abruptly,
Right.
because he probably should have stayed on, if only to try to sort of articulate the movement all the more effectively,
Right.
to literally project it into the future and to start pointing to the leaders of the future. Look, I think the squad is fantastic. However, there's a big age gap between Bernie Sanders and these first year or first term congressional women. And what we really needed is a little more sense of who are the other folks who are going to take charge of this movement, both politically and otherwise. Now, having said that, okay, those are my concerns. Having said that, we do have possibilities. Crises afford opportunities. So, for example, we've seen worker insurgency.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
and it is essential for us, in however whatever it takes, to get the voices of those worker insurgents out into the public realm. Now, that's tough because the mainstream media wants to ignore that or view it as simply a sort of a one day wildcat thing or whatever else, which makes shows like yours, working people with Max Alvarez,
Yeah.
Michael Brooks, all of these kind of shows, all the more essential because young people and the vast audiences of podcast listeners need to know that there is this kind of thing, and we need to offer solidarity with them. It's also the case that it's also the case we do have some figures who may well represent a possible direction to the future. Ro Khanna, the California congressman, Sarah Nelson, the labor leader. I mean, these folks probably represent the future of our movement if we can articulate a movement.
Mm.
Okay. But it's okay. So having said that, I don't know what to expect. I mean, it's difficult, but you can feel something happening.
Right.
And the question is, but nothing, let's not get anarchistic about it and assume that spontaneity is the answer to all this stuff. It's not. Okay, we're going to really have to cultivate leaders, and we're going to also have to consider the fact that we have an immediate crisis, and every solidarity that we can afford, we must develop.
Mm.
That's how I view it right now. And I've been doing a number of shows, and I was thrilled to be able to come back on with you after all these years. And I hope what I'm saying resonates with people. I mean, solidarity is absolutely essential. The book Take Hold of Our History, Make America Radical Again, when I was putting it together, I had, call me naive again or a romantic, I had truly believed there was a great opportunity to secure the presidency with Bernie Sanders.
Mm.
And I, in that book, called for the creation of a united front or a popular front reminiscent of the 1930s.
Mm.
And
Okay.
in many ways, even now, in the absence of a Sanders campaign, I still hope that we can cultivate that sensibility, that sense of identity. Because whether it's Trump who stays president, in which case the battle is going to be very intense to avoid fascism, I fear. But or for that matter, if Biden, okay, and I have some thoughts about that. The fact is, we're still going to have to fight. We're going to have to make sure that we are not as deferential
Right.
as we have been to these kinds of political figures.
The full interview is available to all of our patrons. Immediately after the music, we'll go right back into it. And the conversation, I promise you, it is critical, discussing the revolution and the revolutionary spirit of America, and how we are currently underneath a regime that is rewriting that radicalism of America. And they no more have the right to claim what it means to be American than the radical tradition in America. So go to patreon.com to get access to that. Patrons, stay tuned. There's a whole lot more show to go after this music. For those of you who want access, patreon.com/the BPD show. Those of you who can't get access, thank you so much for just being here. You have been a beautiful audience, and I will see you next time. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.patreon.com/the BPD show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show. If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.